Important notice: the following content may be triggering. Viewer discretion is advised. All discussions are based on personal opinions and experiences.
Yeah, I see. I see me.
Has been doing this.
Well, with this platform, we've been doing it for about a month and a half,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Before we were recording them and putting them in.
We hope you're enjoying this episode of Through the Eyes of Survivors. We wanted to pause for a moment and let you know that Through the Eyes of Survivors has a shop now open. And this is a great way for you to not only help survivors of domestic violence, but also let everyone know that you will not be silent. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Through the Eyes of Survivors. My name is Tara Woodlee, and I am the president of Break the Silence Against Domestic Violence, an organization that gives survivors and
Important notice: the following content may be triggering. Viewer discretion is advised. All discussions are based on personal opinions and experiences. If you or someone you know needs help, please reach out to a local support organization. Important notice: the following
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to Through the Eyes of Survivors. We are so happy to have you. We definitely have an episode for you today. I'm your host, Tara Woodlee, and today we're going to dive into a deeply important topic that has very complex conversation going with it. Can healing coexist with continued trauma? Challenging the beauty in the cracks theory. So, um, just for a moment, though, we would like to plug one of our affiliates. So, if you follow us in our content, especially over on TikTok and YouTube and other things, you'll see clips from our podcast. Well, we do that through a wonderful software called Opus Clips. So, definitely, you can make your content work smarter for you with this. It makes it very easy. You can maximize your reach with the content and repurpose the long-term videos for shorter clips that are perfect for your social media. Whether you're a creator, advocate, or business owner, this AI powered tool helps you engage more viewers in less time. So try Opus Clips today and support BTSADV while you're doing it. Use a special link. It's scrolling across the bottom of your screen, but also it's HTTPS. Do www.opus.pro / via equals BTSADV 25. Um, so in today's episode, there is a phrase often used in healing spaces. There is beauty in brokenness. I have definitely heard that, especially through my process of grieving. And it's inspired by an idea that cracks and imperfections and scars, they tell a story, right, of survival and resilience. It's rooted in the concept of Japanese art, repairing broken pottery with gold, making the cracks celebratory part of your history, right? Many find the metaphor comforting and a way to reframe their pain into something meaningful. But does the mindset really truly serve those who are still in the midst of trauma? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Can healing genuinely coexist with ongoing adversity? Or does the perspective inherently pressure survivors to romanticize their suffering before they've had a chance to fully process it? So, today we're going to challenge that theory. So we have Elizabeth Estabrooks, MSW, with us. Elizabeth has been a force in the world of social justice and domestic violence and sexual assault advocacy for over 3 decades. And from consulting with national organizations like the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention to shape policies for veterans affected by domestic violence, she brings an incredible depth of experience and insight to this conversation. As Oregon's first woman veterans coordinator, she continues to advocate for the unique needs of women who have served our country. Elizabeth will help us explore whether the beauty in the cracks theory is empowering or potentially harmful, and whether that's a healthy approach for survivors to take in their healing journey, or does it set them back? So let's dive into this. Welcome, Elizabeth. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Tara. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. It's really a pleasure to be here. As I mentioned before we went live, I've done some other podcasts since in promotion of my book, but this is the first one that's not veteran or military related. And I love your organization and what you're doing. And so thank you so much for inviting me here today.
Oh, thank you. It's wonderful to have you here. So, Elizabeth, what led you to writing your book? What is the book called again for our viewers?
It's called Broken in the Stronger Places, from
Right.
Resilience to Resourcefulness.
Wonderful. So tell us a little background about that and how you started to write that and what led you to that.
So I actually, the phrase was something that I came up with when I was working as the Women Veterans Coordinator in Oregon. We were preparing for a conference, and conferences always have themes and titles. And so I wanted it to be, I took it to our director and said, I think this would be a good theme for our conference. And she just absolutely poo-pooed it. She said, no, that's negative and we have to stay positive. And I said, well, there's so much negativity in our women's lives and experiences that by not acknowledging that, we're really just brushing it under the rug and disallowing women to talk about that. You just want everything's life is not perfect and life is not flowers and roses,
Mhm.
sometimes in a bad way, but it's not just the pretty stuff. We have to acknowledge that not so pretty stuff, and we have to allow survivors and victims the space and the freedom to say it's not okay, because especially as women, we're raised, it's a culture that we're raised in, that we, how are you? I'm fine. Or
Yeah.
is there, oh, I'm good, I'm fine. Those are the phrases that we use. We could be hemorrhaging, and if somebody said, how are you, we'd say, I'm fine. And I think that it's unfortunate that that's the expectation. If you say, how are you today, and somebody says something besides I'm great, I'm good, I'm fine, you kind of, people get uncomfortable and want to escape. And
Oh,
so,
yes. Yes.
and we've all experienced it. And so they want to believe you have a great relationship. He's such a nice guy, or she's such a nice person. But that's a limitation for all the victims and survivors out there, because it's like in my book I say, I talk about the fact that I really would like to stop hearing people say, oh, you're the strongest person I know.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Because what that saying means is, I don't want to hear about the weaknesses or the challenges. I just want, you need to be strong for me, because I've put you on that pedestal and you need to just remain there no matter how bad life is for you. You have
Yes.
to be the strongest. You could be, again, hemorrhaging. You could have broken bones and people go, oh, you'll get through this. You're the strongest person I know. And that is not a helpful phrase coming from a social work perspective and an advocacy perspective. We understand that's helpful for nobody. It doesn't make them go, you know what, you're right, I got this. I mean, it could, I suppose, but a lot of times it just silences victims, and victims and survivors are already silenced enough.
Yes. Yes. I agree. I agree so much. I relate to this so much because I know many of the viewers out there know I lost a daughter to domestic violence, and doing all this work and advocacy work and stuff, I've heard that phrase so often. And I sit back and I look and I go, "Yeah, I'm not that strong. I do this because I have
Um,
to, because I had to. I was put
yeah.
in a position of this is necessity."
Yep.
I could have fallen apart. Yes, I understand that, but you're only as strong as the people behind you willing to help you a lot of times. And I couldn't do many of the things I've done over the years without, the support of a lot of great people behind me.
Mhm.
But strength, I don't know if it's necessarily, I wouldn't call it that at
Mhm.
all because I don't feel strong the majority of the time at all. I just feel like I'm doing each step that I have to do in order to get to the next process,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that's very common amongst survivors as well. It's hard to hear those kinds of phrases.
Well, and it's we're in situations where that's people put we are stuck in survival so often as survivors and victims.
Yes.
We don't, in my book, one of the things I say is I just had to get through. I had kids to raise, jobs to do, money to bring in, a house, a mortgage to pay for, kid activities. I had to just keep moving. I had to survive because all of these other things were pressing in on me. I didn't have time for self-care. I didn't have time for anything. I just had to. People see survival as strength.
Mhm.
And when I was doing my work, I started in the field of domestic violence and sexual assault at a community organization, a crisis center, as a director. Well, first as a board member, then as a director. And it as somebody, and this, as and all the advocates listening know this, and all the social justice warriors know this.
Mhm.
That vicarious trauma is real, and it can undo you. And anytime somebody tells me that they're in that field or they're doing that work, I always say, you have got to take care of yourself, because I didn't. And I, after 30 years, I just snapped. And I had to, that's why I had to leave my job, is because I actually was on a Zoom meeting and I hit leave meeting and I never went back. And it was just all of the stuff. I was at the VA, and it was everything that they were not doing and that they were not acknowledging. And they were, they do these things and they call them best practices. And
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. And it's contrary to what everybody in the field knows to be true. They have these they make these decisions that, even though the majority of victims are women who are abused by men, the women and survivors, yes, we all know what happens to men too, but they won't acknowledge that, because think about it, the VA is like, 17 million men and 2 million women.
Right.
And so they're determined we have to be gender neutral. And I used to say, gender neutral only helps for those people who are in the majority. It does not help for those who are not in the majority. And you're discounting and dismissing the experiences of 2 million women veterans when you do that. And they would do these different programs and put out this media, and they called it best practice, but it wasn't best practice. It was what VA came up with and decided to call it best practices.
Right.
They wanted men to go to anger management. And I would say that's not a best practice.
Right.
They didn't want men. They wanted veterans, instead of going to court for battering, they wanted to push around the nation for males to go, uh, instead of to veterans intervention. They were pushing for them to go to an anger management, or to treatment programs that were co-ed, that were like couples.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was shocking. Or
Yes.
they would want them to not have to pay for it. So they wanted them to go to these free ones. And when I was here in Oregon, I was thrilled that Multnomah County, uh, they said, no, we if it happens in this county, their butts are not going to your little free program. They're going to the 6-week or 8-week or whatever it is, batters intervention program that is evidence based. And so it was always a great source of frustration for me. And that just kind of built on that anger toward their ineptitude and refusal to really examine domestic violence and sexual assault that pretty much every woman has. Uh, it just it piled on to all of the trauma that I had been absorbing, between my own trauma that started when I was in the military, and then relationships, and then speaking to all of those women. So it was not a healthy, and still isn't a healthy environment, but
Yeah, absolutely.
and that's why I left.
Mm. Yeah, so you left, and so you didn't just dive right into the book. You started a line of healing, right? And so
I
tell us
did.
about that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. So I I realized I was falling apart. That there were some incidents that led up to my leaving. One was a woman who had been assaulted by a doctor at a VA hospital, and we discovered there was more than one woman, and he continued to have his job. And the secretary, the deputy secretary of the VA, said it's VA policy that providers who sexually assault don't have to leave their jobs unless they lose their state license. And I was
Wow.
shocked, and I was angry, and I said a lot of things, and I said, I'm not going to let this go. And my director at the time, I said, you're mandated by law, by the congressional policy that held up this office. you're required to fight to change policy. And she said, oh, I can't fight that. And I said, it's literally your job to fight that. How, like, what's with the refusal? But that was part of what the administration was doing. And then somebody that's very dear to me was sexually assaulted. And that I felt all of the gold and lacquer that I had put on, that I had applied, was really starting to break away. Like, I had known for a while that I was not emotionally and mentally healthy, but I just kept doing my work because it was like, I have to do this work. These women need me. I have to do this work. I have to do this work. And so I would just like, before I got dressed in the morning, I'd just be like that. My clothes and my makeup and my hair were all just part of the lacquer and gold that I applied every day, just so I could get through my job. And so that's why I loved your introduction and what you were talking about, the beauty, and and I just kept ignoring it, and it just kept getting worse. And so then after I found out she was sexually assaulted. Then we had another woman who, it was literally, Tara, in about 30 years, it was the worst story of that I had ever heard. Like, I was surprised she lived through it. And just her trauma was so fierce and so painful, and you could just see it and hear it. And so, and we were always just on the phone and email, but I knew it was there. And she had a really horrible experience, and the VA, she had filed her claim for her disability, and the VA had denied her. And one of the reasons they did was because, even though we had worked really hard over the years to make sure that a survivor of any kind of sexual trauma or violence could say, I want a woman, I want a man, I don't, like, as a woman, I don't want to talk to a man, I only want a woman. So she has her call. It was during COVID. She gets her call, and it's from a man who is a psychologist. And he was a very aggressive man. And she shut down. She just absolutely, and she just started answering yes to all the questions. And so they were like, well, clearly she doesn't have anything wrong with her. And somebody called her and said, we're confused about your answers. And she said, and she told her, I shut down. And, she told the woman, and she thought she was going to get a new comp pen exam. Instead, they just denied her claim. So it was moved into appeals, and I couldn't get the appeals to back down. I had all this information. I had written this long email, and the worst part, talking about how inept the VA is. A woman who was on the hotline, she sent out a massive email to like 17 people. So let's talk about violating the need to know, right?
Right.
And PIA. So I just snapped. I just snapped. That was like August. And then it had just been an ongoing fight to get justice for these women. And I was broken. I snapped. And in September, I was in a meeting, the end of September, a Zoom meeting, and they were patting themselves on the back for their crappy work, for their crappy bystander intervention program. Like, just, it was horrible. And I had been trying to correct it. And I just, watching them pat themselves on the back, and then my director came up with something, and I just was sitting there, and I just hit leave meeting. And I called my friend who was a veteran, and she said, she said, first of all, I'm going to help you get through this. I need you to breathe. And do I need to come there? If I need to come, I will come. Do I need to call 911? Like, what do we need to do for you in this moment? So we got through it. And she said, I want you to pull up your email, because you're not in any condition to do anything. So pull up your email and write what I tell you to write. So she had written, in summary, I'm leaving. I'm taking off. I'm taking mental health leave. And don't bother me. Don't talk to me. Leave me alone. I will tell you if what my psychologist says in her direction. And she said, when I got through with my psychologist, she said, that is a toxic workplace. It's a toxic, unsafe workplace. And you have had PTSD for so long that you have to leave, and you can't ever do that work again. You can never again engage in anything where you hear another story, because it will be your complete and utter undoing if you do. So I left VA, and it was so interesting. And I talk about this in my book. I was so outside my people. Everybody listening, don't ever make decisions when you're in crisis, because it does not go well for you. You make really
Right.
bad decisions.
Absolutely.
Usually it costs you money, and then you spend more money to fix it, which doesn't really fix it. So I was in this cycle, and all I knew was I had to leave. I had there was no I hadn't consciously thought of it. I was just like, I gotta go, I gotta go, I gotta go. I bought a 2000 Dodge uh, coach house, which is a camper van. I put all my stuff in storage. I rented out my condo and I left. And I remember my friends. I was staying with them in my van in their driveway, and I remember them. I was so close to Thanksgiving, and they said, "Please just stay. It's just 2 more days." And I remember being freezing, Tara. I was so cold. And when I was writing my book and I looked back on that, it was like 55 degrees. But it was me. All I knew was I needed to go. I needed to be in the sun. I needed to be warm. I needed to be away from it. And I had an emotional support dog, a little Shih Tzu named Beyonce. She was,
Yeah. Beyonce.
and,
That's so sweet.
and one of the things I say in my book is she really needed her own emotional support animal by this time. She was just, she was, so
Yeah, our pets feel it too. They
yeah,
really
that's
do.
their job, is to hug you and kiss you and be up here on your neck and do all the things. She used to literally hug me, and so we got in the van and we just started driving. And I remember not really being conscious of it. I had my map, and I went where it told me to go. I stopped when I knew Beyonce needed to the bathroom. I stopped when I had to and when I had to get gas, and that was it. I just kept driving and thinking, oh, palm trees, oh, traffic, oh, rain. Like, I was observing it, but completely detached from it. And it took about a month. I went down to Florida, and it took about a month for me to kind of snap out of it. And it's interesting because I met some family down there, and I put on my happy face. I did the
Mhm.
stronger thing. I put on my happy face. I pretended everything was fine with me. I'm fine. I'm healthy. I'm good. And but I was starting to come out of it. But I was on the road for a year. I was 10 months in my van, and then another like 4 months. Um, so just over a year. I went over 20,000 miles in that
Wow.
year. I drove all over the United States except for the northeast corner and into Baja. I spent a month driving around Baja by myself. And and it that was, but I didn't start writing. Back to your question, I'm sorry.
No.
Back to the question, I got in my van at Thanksgiving, and I started writing in January. And all I just knew from the beginning that that had to be the name of my book. And my 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 future daughter-in-law, she's the one. I asked her to design the book cover. I told her what it was, and she designed the beautiful book cover that you all see, and
Oh,
when you see the book.
wonderful.
Yeah, and so I started writing, and I wrote. I just like, and I was on this call earlier. They were talking about like different ways that the people write it. They were talking about outlines and all. And I've never been a outline person. When I was at Columbia in my master's program, I had to write an outline for something, and I was just like, so I wrote the paperwork first, and then I wrote the outline because they required an outline.
I work backwards like that too. So.
And so I wasn't even conscious of, like, I just was started writing. I just
Mhm.
would write and write and write and write. And I would say writing is my superpower. So it
Yeah.
was very clean. It was like it only needed one developmental edit and one copy edit
Oh, wow.
before, yeah. And so but what I did was I wrote in sort of pieces and chunks. So
Right.
I didn't just go from chapter one to the end. I wrote it. I had all of these things I had written, and then I had to put them all together at the end in a way that
Right.
and that was pretty time consuming. But I wrote from January until October, and in October, my family got real pissed off because was. I was telling my mom's story. My mom was sexually assaulted from the time she was 9 until 15.
Wow.
And she, right after I had started with Mayday, with the domestic violence organization, we were driving, and she just started talking and sharing, and I just knew instinctively, and I just had entered the field of domestic violence and sexual assault, and I just knew instinctively that if I cried, my mom was going to shut up.
Right.
So I just sat there and listened and said, "I'm sorry, Mom." And finally she said, "Oh," and she was crying and she said, "I shouldn't have said that. No daughter needs to hear that." I said, "Mom, you need to say what you need to say." And so while I was involved in the organization, I was helping her. Like there was a workbook called, I think it was called Choices.
Okay.
It was a workbook for women who were survivors and victims to help them get through it. And I remember there was some pretty raw stuff like using the F word. And Mom was she called me one day. She's like, "I can't do this. It's obscene." And I said, "Mom, everybody has their own healing path. You do
Yes.
the exercises that don't involve curse words, and don't read theirs. If you see curse words, just don't read it. But every
Right.
survivor has their own path. So choose
Mhm.
yours and do that." So it was really my mom that, some of my family was real mad at me for telling that story because Mom was ashamed of it. And I said, "They're always ashamed. Everybody's ashamed. They
Oh,
don't,
yeah.
they don't talk." And then, and it's because of shame. My mom once told me she wouldn't go to groups because then people would know she was there. And I said, "But Mom, let's put some logic to that. They they're not going to go out and talk about you because then they're going to have to share that they're in this group for survival."
Right. Absolutely.
But
Oh,
she had the experience that so many people had. She had gone to a psychologist who had basically told her it was all in her head. All of her feelings, all of her self-hatred, all of her shame, everything was all in her head. And so all of that affected me and
mhm.
drove me to keep doing the work. And I said to my family, "I can't. It's only like one page, her story. It's not her whole story. It's segments."
Mhm.
And one of the things I said is, my story and my mother's story are intimately connected.
Oh, yes.
I did my job partly because of Mom. That
Yeah.
was why I spent almost 30 years in that field, was because of my mother and her story and her pain. And and I and they said, "Well, change your name." I said, "No, I'm not going to." I think that if Mom were alive, she would have given me permission to do that. So
Yeah.
in October, I stopped writing. I tried and I just couldn't. I couldn't write. Every time I would sit down, so that was a little bit of trauma for me, right? And so then in February, another member of my family that I love dearly stopped talking to me, wouldn't give me a reason, had just shut off everything from me,
Mhm.
wouldn't respond to nothing, absolutely nothing. And so finally, in I had returned to Oregon in February, and I was living in Portland, and a friend of mine who lives there, we were talking one day. She's like, "Girl, you got to finish that book," and it
Right.
was something about that simple phrase that made me go, "You're right."
Yes.
And
I'm
so,
experiencing that right now myself because 'cause I'm
yeah,
trying to finish my book, and I've had various people come up and go, "You've got to finish that book." I'm like,
yeah,
"Yes.
and so
Yes."
when you're ready, you'll get back to it, like I did. And so I finished it in about October.
Mhm.
And I self-published. If you need any mentoring or help on that, Tara.
Oh, wonderful. That would be wonderful.
It's
I may
hard.
be contacting you.
It's a hard thing to do
It
for
is.
any. It's really, and I chose the self-publishing route because I didn't want, if you go through it publishing, one of the big five publishing groups, um, you you what you find is that they basically own you. They own most of the rights to your book. They have complete and utter control. And a friend of mine who is a veteran, she had written a book, and she was telling me about all the things that they forced her to do and undo that she didn't want to. And then she said the final straw was when she went to do her audiobook and they told her she couldn't read her own book. She had to pay for somebody. And
And that's for survivors to just be able to speak their own truths, let
yeah,
alone write it, and then they take it. That's just
yeah,
why not compound more trauma? You know?
exactly. That's exactly right. And so she wrote three more books and she's self-published all of them. And she was a great mentor to me while I was writing. And that's one of the reasons I chose the business name A Woman's Voice Press, because right now I'm all wound up in doing my book tour and getting everything out there. But eventually I want to be able to work with women who are writing or who are whatever the case might be, so I can help guide them. Because I spent a lot of what I learned from this book.
Yeah.
And then it gave me I still felt unprepared, so it gave me some basis for doing some research on my own and finding somebody who would help me get it to market. So the book though is it's I have a trigger warning at the beginning, but I was very conscientious about not telling people stories. I tell it on a high level, like I talked about the woman who had the brutal assault, but I don't go into any details. I don't go into details about my experiences. I do about
Right.
like, some of my like the some of the things that happened in the military, but I it's a book that it kind of winds through uh, my own from my own experience in the military to relationships to working with women with thousands of women over the years, and we get to the the VA and the journey, but it's
Awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna read a couple comments here, and then let's see here. We had a LinkedIn user say, "Not a choice to be strong. There's no choice, no option." So many of us feel that way, so you're definitely not alone in that. And Audrey's saying she should write her own book, start her book. Yes, Audrey, you should.
yes, you should do it,
Yes,
Audrey.
you should. Absolutely. So, wonderful. Definitely keep the comments coming. We'll be engaging with you. So, right now we're going to take a short break, real quick. Do a little advertisement for our store. Be less than a minute. We'll be right back, and then we're going to talk some more about the whole conversation over the concept of broken beauty and dive into that. So stay tuned, please.
We hope you're enjoying this episode of Through the Eyes of Survivors. We wanted to pause for a moment and let you know that Through the Eyes of Survivors has a shop now open. And this is a great way for you to not only help survivors of domestic violence, but also let everyone know that you will not be silent about this important cause. From t-shirts to bags to coffee mugs, we have so much to choose from. To grab your swag, head to our store at breakthesilencedv.org. That's store.breakthesilencedv.org. We can't say enough about how much we appreciate all that the community does to help support us and this organization. So we hope you've enjoyed this episode and continue to subscribe to future episodes. Thank you. We hope you're enjoying this episode of
Right. We should be back. Okay.
I'm going shopping. I'm going to the bag.
We're having a little technical difficulty here, but Amanda will get us set back up here in a second. But yeah, so while she's fixing us up here, let's entertain this. And I'd love for people in the comments to engage with us on some of these questions from your perspective or what your thoughts are. But let's talk about that beauty in the cracks mindset, right? I I know that personally, um, that especially when you've been through something very traumatic, you want to think that something beautiful comes out of the experience of something traumatic. But I know in my case personally, that kind of thinking definitely had some setbacks for me personally, just on a personal level, um, because it made it okay to not grieve, to not experience or feel what I felt in the moment. And there was moments that I just had to embrace whatever it was I was feeling in that moment. I had to be able to grieve my daughter and the and things that went on, even my own experiences as a survivor. And not that that mindset isn't a beautiful thing, because it's a beautiful story, isn't it, Elizabeth? It's a beautiful concept. But I know that uh, I can see from personal experience where it can be a hindrance. So let's talk about that, about what you saw that helped you write this book over that topic?
So, really the phrase broken in the stronger place is about re-traumatization, because in the early 90s, based on the art of kintsugi, where they repair the porcelain with the gold, uh, the idea, as you explained earlier, was that it made you stronger in the broken places. So it makes the piece stronger in the broken places. So the field of psychology adopted that as a sort of a theory or a metaphor, if you will, that if you have experienced trauma and you do all the work that you can do, and you take all the steps for recovery and healing, and then you too can be stronger in the broken places. And I used to believe that when I first started in this field, and I heard that, I thought, yeah. And as time went on, as I continued to do my work, and now I had my own trauma from the army and from relationships, and then I had vicarious trauma, which little side note, I used to teach on vicarious trauma, but I had convinced myself that I was fine.
Right.
And I was doing healthy things to decompress, and it took until about a few years ago for me to understand that I wasn't fine, that all of that had seeped into my soul, and it had hurt me. And I had a phrase called, that when I would talk to women, when I would sit down with them, I would say, "Tell me what I need to know to help you." And then they would just start talking. And sometimes I didn't even need to say that. They just started talking. And so I had heard so many horror stories from women. And the book, and I want to say this, a lot of people say, well, what about the men? One person asked me to be gender neutral. And I said, no, the sum of my experiences, the complete sum of my experience was women, working with women and girls. And so that's where I come from with this book. That's why I talk about women. And that's why I refer to women as victims and survivors, because that's all I've ever known and done.
Right.
And that's not to dismiss the experiences of men or of people who have been harmed by women. It's part of it is data. We know that the mass majority of abusers and offenders are men, and we know that the vast majority of victims and survivors are women. So I was following that path, and then I realized when I was working here in Oregon that really we can become broken in those strong places through re-traumatization, through
Right.
triggering, through all of the things that we experience daily. So really, broken in the stronger places is about the re-traumatization that we go throughout our lives. We can heal. We could go to therapy. We can do all the things. We can have all the tools, but that trauma is still inside of us. It's still living inside of us. Trauma never goes away, and that's one thing that pretty much everybody agrees on, is that trauma does not go away, whether it's a plane crash or a public event, or and I'll give you an example. When I was working in the field, when I was the director at the organization, was when the O.J. Simpson and Nicole Brown Simpson
Oh, yes.
happened.
Yes.
And what we experienced was a massive re-traumatization all around the United States. People in the field, like your organization, were hearing stories from women who had been out of their bad relationships, their hurtful, harmful relationships for decades. And
Yeah.
suddenly it was just all coming back onto them. And that was a mass triggering event. And it was a mass re-traumatization event for women. And so when I was doing my work at the Oregon Department of Veterans Affairs, I really started to understand in all of my conversations with women that they thought they were fine. I've
Yes.
been fine, and I'm now, what's wrong with me? I'm not fine. I'm being triggered for some reason. Like, I've done the therapy, and of course, because we're women, the way we're socialized is to believe that everything is our fault, right? It's all our fault. If a man hurts us, it's our fault. If we get sexually assaulted, it's our fault. If we don't, if we, it, you know, and there's this whole like, I'm a person who always wants to get an A. So if we feel like we didn't achieve the best we could achieve in counseling or therapy, then we think we did something wrong. Because one of the things that I came to understand was that we don't, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. I'm 66, it happens.
It's all right. We were talking about the re-traumatization with
Oh,
OJ
oh,
and all of
thank
that,
you.
yeah.
So therapists don't tell you. You don't get notice, and I know this because I've been through a lot of therapy. Nobody tells you it could happen. You could be re-traumatized.
Yes, they don't tell you that.
They don't. Nobody talks about it. So here's what I always say: if we put trauma on a continuum like this, over here is here's the event, the
Right.
trauma event, and then here's all the therapy and the healing and the work, and the post-traumatic growth. But nobody ever talks about all of this. That is the re-traumatization. We have to start talking about this part of the continuum, and until we do, we're doing a great disservice to
Yes.
victims and survivors. And so the book is about re-traumatization and that's the resilience to resourcefulness, because resilience, you always hear about resilience in trauma. We need to do better. We need to have more resilience. We see research that says, if people have good resilience, they're less likely to go through all this post-traumatic stress. But nobody ever talks about resourcefulness, and resourcefulness is over here. It's this. The resilience is here with it, because you need the resilience, and I'm not
Right.
trying to discount that, but the resourcefulness. And my friend Clarice is the one who helped me, because the book was only strong in the broken places, and one of the publishing people said you need a subtitle. And so I happened to be at Clarice's, and we were talking, and she said, "How about from resilience to resourcefulness?" And I was like, "Oh, that's brilliant."
great.
And she said, resourcefulness is what got you in your van and on that road trip. It
Exactly.
was your resourcefulness that got you through. And I had never thought about that, Tara. And so that resourcefulness piece is really important. And I talk a lot about resilience and resourcefulness, and I give tools. It's not just my memoir. It's all we know and don't know about trauma and resilience and resourcefulness. And what does that mean? What does it look like? How do we put it into play? What are the tools that we can take on, or that we can think about, so that if there is a trauma experience, and if we're re-traumatized, we are better prepared. If we know that exists, and we know that we have to have those tools and be prepared, we are better prepared when it happens. Because
Yes.
then we can say, okay, I'm feeling triggered. I'm feeling re-traumatized. I know what this feeling looks like. It feels like. Then we can say, let me get out my little tool bag and start working that, whether it's going on a weekend trip with your best friend, or staying in bed for 3 days, or whatever it is.
Yes.
You do that, and then you're more prepared to keep moving without that additional harm.
Yes, I love that whole concept, because that's, I think, a big key that people don't realize. You want to use all your resources.
Yeah.
So we get fixated on, if I do this, this will fix it.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily true. The one resource doesn't totally fix something,
Yeah.
you know. So you have to use all the resources that are available to you, and how do you find that? What journey do you take to discover it? It's long term. And people want to think, after a year or two or whatever, you should be over this and moved on and worked through it, and that nothing should come up 10 years later or
Yeah.
15 years later. Or
Yeah.
how can you still be dealing with that? And everybody has shared experiences that brings up certain things to the surface, no matter how long something has gone by. So I think talking about that and having those kinds of conversations are key, because then the expectation is not feeling like you're some kind of failure. There's something wrong with you
Yeah.
when
That's right.
there's not.
I had a friend that sent me a message, and she said, "Oh my God, thank you so much." She said, "I've been to therapy. I went back into therapy, and I just feel like such a failure. I don't know what's wrong with me. And now, after talking to you in reading this, I understand I have a re-traumatization event happening. But she said, I've been so invested in blaming myself for failing therapy, for not doing the right things to get through it, to not get over it. And I was like, yep, yeah, that's right. That's
Well, it contributes to setbacks, right? So, what would you tell people if you are experiencing something where that re-traumatization comes on and they experience this kind of ongoing pain or setbacks? What approach should they be taking?
and again, I think it's a matter of being prepared for it, understanding that it can and will happen,
Right.
and don't let your mind go to I'm a screw up, I did something wrong, it's me, it's me, it's me, because that's what we're going to do, and especially as survivors,
Mhm.
we're going to put it all on us. It's my fault he did this. It's my fault he did that. It's my fault, you know. And
Or
so,
I keep picking the wrong men over and
oh
over
yeah,
again. That,
the
yeah,
picker is broken.
that's
No,
my fault. Yeah, my picker's broken. Yes.
yeah, I don't like that, um,
Mhm.
because the truth is that men who are abusers, they have some kind of sick radar that
Mhm.
they based on things, they're going to be this knight in shining armor. They're going to be this great guy, and then suddenly they're not anymore. But they reach out to the most vulnerable and the
Yes.
people who have experiences of interpersonal violence in their lives. We are all so vulnerable to that,
Mhm.
and those guys know that. And so I think the first thing is not thinking you're a failure or you did something wrong.
Right.
And the second thing is following your instincts. I've always said we have great instincts. We have that gut feeling, but we discount it because it's not like the Western thing to do. But if you have an instinct or a feeling about someone or something, then follow that. If you've been re-traumatized, sit with that and say, yes, this happened. And what do I need to get through it? Or just do what I did and just throw it all to the wind and go, because that's what your entire being is saying to you. Do this thing. and
Mhm.
and and so really acknowledging and honoring your experiences, how you feel in the moment, and what you need to do for you in that moment and in the next whatever, to get through that whatever way you can, in a healthy way that's not harming you or anybody else. And I like Audrey said, we know before we know. Yeah,
Yes.
we feel it. We like everything inside of us recognizes that trauma and that triggering and that re-traumatization. And too often what we do is we ignore it. I'm busy. I gotta do this. I gotta do that. I gotta put it aside. I have to stuff it. I had a woman veteran, and this is in my book once. She had, like so many women who never told anyone, she had carried that trauma with her without sharing the words forever. And then when she finally decided to file her service connected disability claim, she fell apart because it all just came down on top of her.
Yes.
And she called me one day and she was like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I've been fine all these years. And that was, I've been fine, sister. Have you really though?
Yes. Have you really been fine? Yes.
Yeah. And so she said, and we were both from like these rural dry areas, like I think in the Midwest is where we both started it. So those of you who live in the Midwest and the dry areas are going to know this analogy, because what happens is the dirt just, after rain, it just turns into this like hard mud field that's got big cracks in it.
Mhm.
If after another rain you go out and you poke a hole in that, the water will come up through that hole, and you can't stop that water from coming up through that hole. And so I said to her that, and I said, so you can't plug that hole, honey. There's
Mhm.
nothing, you can't plug it. Here's what I'm going to suggest to you is before we continue with this claim, find a therapist and work with her, and or a support system, a group, a best friend, somebody who's a support system, and say, I need to get through this. I need to get through this thing because it's re-traumatizing me and I need help doing that. And because I said you've opened that big hole, and the only way to get past it is to go through it at this point. And how do you go through it? By
Mhm.
support systems, by escaping, by whatever it is you need to do. And so that's, I think that's a big thing to acknowledge, is that this is happening to me, and how do I follow my instincts, like, or don't even think about it, just be like, oh, this, like, I gotta go, I gotta go, I gotta do whatever. And
Yeah.
I, honoring ourselves and our feelings is the best way we can. And then I've had women, when I was working for VA, I had women who said, I want his name, I want to put his name in my claim. And the veteran service officers would go, oh, you don't need his name. And she would say, I need to name the beast, I need his name to be in that, put his
Hmm.
name in that claim. And the veteran service officers oftentimes didn't understand the need for that. But
Right.
sometimes sometimes we have to name the beast, and sometimes we can't name the beast because we want to protect our family members, our
Hmm.
friends, our kids, our whatever. And so we can't name the beast, but for her and for some of these other women, that was such an important step in their healing.
No, no, I can definitely see that. I know I was thinking while you were talking about, like, one of the things I wish some of these places would do, whether it be the military or businesses, especially these organizations who have advocacy work and stuff. One of the things we experienced here was, of course, we're getting survivor stories in, and all of us, well, we're like 95% survivors volunteering. The organization is Survivors Helping Survivors, right? And so we went through a period of where you could see the re-traumatization happening, even though we do go through a process of, you need to be so healed, so far out, and being sure that we were seeing a lot of that. So we had to implement certain things here, what we call care breaks. So any
Mm.
volunteer or somebody that is going through that, where they feel like something has triggered them into feeling like they're being re-traumatized, will then take the time to go and take care of you. And when we implemented that, we started seeing more retention within our volunteers, because they were able to take the time to do
Yeah,
that and acknowledge it
yeah.
and have that support system, at least from us. And I would love to be able to see other advocacy workplaces be able to do that for the people who are working for them or helping them, because it made such a huge difference here for sure.
And I think that's spot on. And I think not just advocacy organizations, but all businesses
Yes.
should have that allowance. It, they, I used to do a training on violence in the workplace, domestic violence in the workplace in particular, and in my book there's some back pages. There's one on developing a safe workplace.
Mhm.
There's one on developing a trauma-informed workplace. So there's the safe workplace. A lot of business owners don't or won't want to know that domestic violence in the workplace is a huge national problem, and
Mhm.
especially if both of them work in that same workplace.
Right.
And so having some kind of policy that that will help you as a supervisor, an owner, or whatever, know what to do in the event. Like, how can you recognize the signs? How can you be a safe person that they can come to and not be worried about losing their jobs or being, pariah or like whatever. When I was working, I did a training one time at a military installation, and he said they only had a few women, and he said, "Oh, we don't worry about sexual harassment here. It's a great place. The women will tell you that." I said, "Would they though?" And so he had arranged for me to have a private session with these women,
Mhm.
and almost without fail, every one of them said, "Yeah, we've experienced we've experienced violence, we've experienced assault," and they said, "But we don't want you to tell him." And I said, "What I'm going to tell him is that it exists. When I do this, because I'm going to go back to him, and he's going to ask me how. When he needs to know, he's not the safe workplace he thinks he is."
Right.
So I went back to him and I said, "You know how you think that nothing bad is happening here and all the women are happy and everything's fine? It's not, my friend." But they did not feel like they could be honest with you. They
Mhm.
did not feel like this is a safe place where they can talk about what's happening to them. And he to his credit, he was visibly shaken by
Mhm.
that knowledge. And I said, so be upset, be shaken, but be committed to change.
Mhm.
And when I think that anytime somebody is doing any work as a consultant, making sure that there is a segment on how do you become a safe workplace? What do you do if some maniac comes through your doors with the intent to harm? Because I assure you, he's not just going to hurt her. He's
Mhm.
going to hurt everybody sitting around her, maybe the receptionist. Like you have to have an alert system. And like
Mhm.
I would help with them to develop a safety word. Like, like if for Department of Human Services, they said that they made their safety phrase, their code phrase be with the person with the red, whatever it was, Mercedes or something, a car that nobody there owned and no client would be driving if they came in. And so that then everybody knew that was the code phrase, that there was trouble and that they need to take the steps that they were trained to take to lockdown. And this was way before like we were doing lockdowns for workplace and mass shootings. This was
Mhm.
just something that they were doing to keep their workplace safe. And so in the book, I talk about like, making sure you have an EAP. If you don't have an EAP, make sure that you're working with your local domestic violence sexual assault organization, because they can help guide you. They can give you some tools so that you can keep everybody in your workplace safe, so that you know what you need to do if they're both working there. How do you keep them out? What do you do? Like a restraining order. And so I think that's a really important thing to do for this whole United States is making sure that workplaces are safe places. And
Yeah.
if a person is missing a lot of work, is it because she's being threatened? Is it because she can't come back to work because she's injured? Like, don't just give her like a little, talk because she's missing a lot of work. Do better to inquire why and what
Mhm.
you can do to help her.
Yes.
So it's all these decades later. I mean, the first domestic violence shelters started in like the 70s, and all these decades later, we still have huge gaps and holes in services.
Absolutely. Absolutely, we sure do. Audrey says, "I have not had the courage to make a claim to the
Mm.
VA."
Yeah, Audrey, I'll make sure that I think she's got my email address that I can't hear your story because that's my trauma. And I've gotten very comfortable with saying that, but I can help you maybe get to the place where you are willing or able to do
I
that.
can get you connected with her. She's actually our, board chairman here.
Oh,
So
nice.
I can
Who's
get you
that?
connected with her. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's important to talk about when we talk about violence, like what does that mean? Like I had this one woman, she wasn't sexually assaulted or harassed in the military, but she was in during Don't Ask, Don't Tell. She was lesbian or is. And she people think Don't Ask, Don't Tell was very subtle. No, it wasn't. People were encouraged to turn people in. There was like a whole slew of stuff. And her trauma was that she was in her room one night, and all of a sudden she said there was banging on her door, screaming, open the door, using her last name, let us in, we've got, and so they came in and they just flipped her room, they like under the mattress, everything. And they ended up kicking her out.
Oh.
And yeah, because she was a lesbian and it was Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And so her trauma was that she couldn't have anybody knock on the door. Like when I went to her house, she had a sign that said, "Do not knock. Please ring the doorbell only." And she actually worked at a prison, and she said it wasn't the prisoners that bothered her. It was that knocking. And so she said she had an open door policy,
Mhm.
and her supervisors were like, "You can't do that." And she said, "I can't have knocking. I can't have people knocking on my door."
Mhm.
And we were able to successfully help her file a claim and get that.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah, so I think it's important that was a form of violence. It was a form of personal violence against her
Mhm.
as a lesbian. And I think that we have to acknowledge that for people of color and people in the LGBTQ community, violence doesn't necessarily look like, sexual assault or being beat up. that personal violence can be against them simply because she's a Black woman or a Latina woman or a lesbian or transgendered or whatever the case might be. And so I think that we have to acknowledge that interpersonal violence can be a large umbrella.
Right. Absolutely. Oh, so yeah, looks like we've had some good comments in here. Let's see what else. Elizabeth, I know we're coming towards the end of the episode here. Is Do you want to give some recommendations here towards the end of some healthier ways to approach that trauma if it does resurface?
Yeah, the drug and alcohol abuse is pretty sizable in survivor populations, and so I think that one of the steps you can take to be healthier is to not use so much or not use at all. Like if you are an alcoholic, if you're using drugs, just that's not the path. But I think recognizing that and scaling back and saying, what do I need to do? Do I need to take up pickleball? Do I
Right.
need to start walking 2 miles a day or whatever? Do I need to go into the gym and lift weights for an hour? Like, do I need to just take a day and just call in sick? Just take a
Mhm.
personal day and call in sick and stay in bed. A young woman once that she was right out of high school and she was just distraught over the loss of a relationship. And I said, listen, girl, I said, go to bed, stay there 2 to 3 days and then get out of bed and carry on.
Mhm.
And so she did that and she sent me a message. She was like, "Oh my God, what great advice. I
I
love
know, well, people
so
need
helpful for me."
permission to go to bed. That was one of the
Yeah.
things I'm very, like, I'm always going, I'm always doing something, but one of the things I did learn through the death of my daughter was when I needed to just get away from everybody, I called I just messaged everybody, said, "I'm spending the day in the bed, don't bother me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't bother me," and it was one of the greatest things I gave myself permission to be able to
Yeah.
do. So,
Absolutely.
I highly recommend it if you can. I know some of my
Yeah.
releases are like gardening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love mowing my lawn, that kinda thing. Put on my music and mow my lawn.
Yeah. When I was working at
Yeah.
Mayday, I had the most beautiful flower garden beds
Mhm.
because I was out there every night. Stabbing at the dirt. But I think really, what you said about calling people, having boundaries and honoring them. If
Mhm.
you have a friend or family member that's unhealthy, that you can't be around, maybe this one woman I met, she had left her husband, her abusive husband of 30 years. And she said every once in a while, somebody in her family would say something about what a nice guy he was or whatever. And she said it would be a huge triggering event for her. So she would back her truck up to her camper trailer and go out to the woods where nobody knew she was for 3 days.
Yeah.
And nobody ever knew where she went because that was her safe time. And she would do it alone and she would just be in that space and just kind of work through it. And
Mhm.
and then she would go home and she would be okay until next time. And so, finding the thing that works best for you. If you love camping, but you haven't been camping in years, honey, go camping.
Go.
If
Go.
you yeah, if you love to swim, but you stop swimming because you're too busy and life's too much, find a pool and get in the water or a
Mhm.
lake or whatever. And and write. Writing is so healing. I've never been one to journal. And part of that is my trust issues. I'm like, what if somebody finds it?
Yeah.
That's but also it just journaling didn't help me, but writing my book, it helped me immensely. And
Write it
so
out and burn it or
yeah,
trash it
yeah,
afterward if you're
yeah.
afraid somebody's gonna see it, but get it on paper
That's right, and
to get it out.
that's a very healthy way to just self-care, and
Mhm.
especially, oh my gosh, especially if you're working in a field where, like, you're a first responder, you're an advocate, you're a volunteer. If you're working in one of those fields where you have that coming at you on a daily basis, consciously practice self-care because
Mhm.
I didn't. I put everything else. I was like, I'm too busy. Too busy to go to the gym. I'm too busy to do this. I'm too busy to do that. I'm too busy to read. I just lay on the bed and drool and watch some stupid comedy, and which was kind of self-care, but it wasn't really processing. I never processed. I just shoved it all down inside of me and said, stay. And eventually it said, no, I'm not going to stay anymore. And
Right.
and I think that making sure that you engage in self-care, and I always tell people, if you get to the point after 10 or 20 years or even 5 years or 10 years, 2 years, if you get to the point where you just can't find a new job, honey, find a new job. You have to take care of you, because eventually you will snap. You'll come completely undone.
Hmm.
And that's no fun either.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. I am so, I just want to thank you for being vulnerable with us, and you're doing an incredible work, and your story's going to inspire a lot of people, I am sure, and help empower them. So if you would like to read Elizabeth's book, Broken in Stronger Places, definitely the link is going to be in all the descriptions. Check that out and get the book. And your support here can make a difference as well. So to continue empowering survivors here at Break the Silence and educating communities, we definitely need your help. So every donation helps to fuel our mission here at BTSADV. It provides resources, helps for support and hope for those affected by domestic violence. You can make a difference by donating to any of the following links that our moderators are posting up in platforms through our website, www.breakthesilencedv.org. We have GoFundMe, we have a Patreon account, Venmo, PayPal, and we also are part of the My Giving Circle.
Oh,
Um, your contribution, no matter what amount, brings us one step closer to breaking the cycle of abuse and building a better world for where everyone feels safe and loved. So stay connected. We want to spread the word that we do have our podcast on different streaming platforms. So these podcasts here are also will be on Spotify, Chrome, and Audible every Monday at 9 a.m. Central Standard Time. You can listen to them on those platforms. And don't forget to subscribe, like, share this episode. Help us, amplify our voices of survivors and create a community here where we're not only resilient but resourceful, right?
yeah.
I definitely am taking that one with me today.
Do it, use it. And if I can, real quick, I also want to say
Yes.
on my website, I'm doing a book tour. I'm leaving Sunday, and I'm going to go across the northern United States, down
Yeah.
the east coast of Florida, back up through the south, and then back north. So if anybody wants, it's the reading and signing events. I have a couple of conferences I'm going to go and speak at. But if anybody out there wants to have me come to their community for a reading, that um, I have kind of a map, I think, on my website, but I think it'll be really helpful for your community. If you want to have me come, just let me know, send a form or email me, and I'll see if I can come to your community and do a reading, especially if you're along the route that I'm already taking.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm sure if you haven't shared that link with Amanda, do that, and we'll have that up in the platforms here as well for you.
Okay.
So definitely tune in next week. Mark your calendars for a special episode of Through the Eyes of Survivors Uncensored, where we hit the hot topics in the news with domestic violence. And we thank you for joining us today. And until next time, stay safe and strong and break your silence. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Through the Eyes of Survivors. My name is Tara Woodlee, and I am the president of Break the Silence Against Domestic Violence, an organization that gives survivors and their families, and the families that have lost loved ones to domestic violence, access to a community that understands the journey that they're facing. We hope this episode impacts you, and hopefully you want to learn more about the topic. If it is helping you in some way, let us know in the comments below. We love your feedback. Also, make sure to click the subscribe button below and the bell right next to it so that you can get notified the next time an episode premieres. We hope you will see us in the next episode, and thank you. Thank you so much